USA 1865. The Civil War has come to a close, Reconstruction has begun, and the concrete freedoms of newly freed black men and women remain ambiguous. Racism still dominates the social aspects of African American life. But while the prejudice of the white man does weigh heavily on blacks, a more brooding, inescapable force restrains them quite literally with steel bars: the law. Did the beginning of Reconstruction truly signify freedom for blacks, or could the law have been manipulated to oppress blacks even after the abolishment of slavery? Starting from the ground up, local laws. By the early 1870s, agriculture in the South was dominated by a new system: sharecropping. In this system, black families would rent small plots of land or shares to work themselves, with the added condition of giving a portion of their crop to the landowner at the end of the year. Though seeming harmless on the surface, this system usually created a debt for blacks that they could not repay. Extreme poverty or violent threats forced blacks into signing unfair sharecropping or labor contracts that would ensure they could not improve their economic situation and would remain oppressed by poverty, with little choice but to abide by the law.
Unfortunately, oppressive laws didn't only exist on a local level. Even state regulations aimed to restrict the activities of the freedmen, the most notable being black codes. White Southerners took back civil authority in former Confederate states and enacted a series of laws that limited African American rights and ensured that they would be available as a labor force, voluntary or not. Many states required blacks to sign a yearly labor contract. Refusal could lead to fines, beating, arrest, or forced unpaid labor. These state laws were allowed to exist with no intervention from the federal level, which brings us to the top of a looming, intimidating tower.
There was no shortage of legal oppression on the federal level. Andrew Johnson, the president at the time, was known for his racist attitude and lack of support for African Americans. Needless to say, having the commander-in-chief of the U.S. against them put blacks at a major legal disadvantage. While whites' control over blacks was being restored in the South, Johnson did not intervene, but instead granted many pardons. He even vetoed civil rights acts and did not support federal establishments that would seek to help blacks, most notably the Freedmen's Bureau. Most unfortunate, though, was the Compromise of 1877. This unwritten deal pulled troops out of the South and effectively ended Reconstruction. The Union had given up. Consequently, white supremacy spiked to an all-time high and its organizations flourished. There was no enforcement of the Reconstruction policies that aimed to assist blacks, and all progress had been for naught. This marked the beginning of Jim Crow laws in the U.S., which would come to define the era.
It couldn't be said that there was no legal progression in favor of blacks, but in the end, the law had more oppressed them than anything else. By the end of Reconstruction, blacks' social, economic, and legal status still remained cut down by unfair laws and an abundance of racism. It is evident that our democracy, one that presently runs the U.S., had been manipulated to hold down an entire race of people. This reveals an unavoidable question of the legitimacy of the system Americans live under this very moment. Whether or not history will repeat itself is for us to decide.